Well, I don't want to get too far afield with this idea that I became a straightened away soldier, because I didn't. I was still pretty much a hippie. And the way it broke down in our company in 1968 was that uh, most everybody in the company was what we called a juicer, and that means alcoholic. And when we were out in the field doing the combat missions, uh, it was a great temptation to bury the stress in alcohol. And when we came back to home base in Nha Trang, the temptation for most people was to just get blotto uh, all the time. Well, the other side of that coin was that probably 40, maybe 50% of the personnel, uh, they were called heads. You had the juicers and the heads. And when you're a juicer all the way. Well, when you're a head all the way. And we were smoking a fair amount of Vietnamese pot. And Vietnamese pot was maybe 2 or 3 times as strong as the pot that we smoked back when we were taking LSD prior to being drafted back in 1966. So, anyhow, I smoked a lot of pot, and after all, I did have a guitar, and I started hanging out with these guys, and they said, "Come here, I want to show you something." And so, down at the far east end of our company area, that was surrounded on 3 sides with 8-foot chain link fence, down at the far end, there was a hole in the fence that was easily brushed aside uh, so that a 6-foot tall soldier could just push the fence and walk on through with um, no obstruction to speak of. And on the other side of that chain link fence was the woodpile. We called it the woodpile. And it was stacks and stacks and stacks of 2x4s and 2x10s and 2x12s. And these just weren't little stacks. They weren't 6 feet tall or 8 feet tall or 10 feet tall. They were like 20 and 30 feet tall. The biggest stacks of wood that you have ever seen. And it was just construction wood that had been sent over to the special forces to build whatever the hell they wanted to build. And actually, I think that most of that wood had been ordered and sent to Vietnam to build what they call Chu Hoi villages, which is if somebody would run away from the NVA or from the Viet Cong, the government program was to set them up in their own house, in their own community, with their own little rice patch. And but anyhow, those villages never got built, and so we had these enormous stacks of wood. And the boys showed me how we could climb up to the top of the woodpile, and the vista was breathtaking. You could see all the way across the airfield to the other side, over to where the 8th Field Hospital was, and you could see all the runway and the aircraft operations going on. And there was a tower, Special Forces Guard Tower, that wasn't too far, maybe 100 yards from the big stack. And so we would climb up on top of this woodpile and smoke and drink and smoke pot is what I meant. And I would play my guitar, and we would make up very silly songs. Uh, they would just say, "Well, make up a song about a Jeep." Okay, so I'd make up a song about a Jeep, and then say, "Well, make up a song about Colonel Ruskoff." No, no, you know, we'll make fun of somebody else. So anyhow, that was a fairly common occurrence for us. I wasn't much of a drinker in those days. I was much more interested in Coca-Cola. And so, anyhow, we would go out there and play and sing. Maybe midnight or so, we'd sneak back into the 281st Company area and get ready for the new day, which began the next, when the sun came up the next day, 5 or 6 a.m. Well, uh, I'm trying to, I don't know if I ought to mention the names of the guys that were out there on the woodpile with us, but I'll just use their first names, okay? There was Travis, and Travis was from Amarillo, Texas, and he was a crew chief, and he was a pothead. Oh my God, he liked to smoke pot. And then there was Donald, and Donald was from Hayward, California. He was also a crew chief, as a degenerate gambler. And let's see, there was Jack, and Jack was from Little Rock, Arkansas. And Jack was the closest living embodiment to the actor Errol Flynn that I have ever seen. I mean, if they ever make a movie of this story, they'll have to get somebody that looks just like Errol Flynn and acts like Errol Flynn to play Jack's part, because he was magnificent. He was really great. A friend in need. All right, so along about this time, I met a guy. I think he was from Upper New York, and he worked in the electronics area. And I don't know how we struck up our conversation. I think it was because he knew some Shakespeare, and he used to rattle off these verses of Shakespeare that really caught my attention. And let me just think here. I cannot remember that guy's name. Cannot remember his name. But I will tell you that that his job was to string telephone line. And he had to string a telephone line from the 281st First Sergeant's office all the way down. Remember that dirt road I told you about that you could walk and it would take you right down to the heart of Nha Trang? Well, I walked down there with him following this telephone line, and it went right smack dab to this place called the Villa. And the Villa was an old French villa that the Special Forces had liberated, so to speak, and the 281st had liberated from the Special Forces. And you will go down there, and there was TVs and refrigerators and stereos and all of this high-class merchandise that had all been liberated from the PXs. And it was a house of ill repute that was being run by the same people who ran the 281st Assault Helicopter Company. And, while I'm talking about the 281st, let me just mention that if you go in and check my records carefully, you'll see that I was not actually assigned to the 281st. I was attached to the 483rd Tech Supply. And the 483rd Tech Supply was under the umbrella of the 281st. And the commanding officer of the 281st ran the show in the 483rd Tech Supply, which was essentially a computer shell. And so I was the 483rd Tech Supply. And after I had kind of made my bones a little bit as the as a real helicopter repair parts specialist, one of the jobs that they gave me was to design and build a trailer. They gave me a half-ton trailer, and they said, what we want you to do is put a shell on this that will fit inside of a C-130 and that we can take to our field operations. And I thought, oh, that sounds pretty cool. And so I just got some paper and a pencil and a ruler, and I drew this thing to scale with all these little pockets and drawers and stuff like that inside the trailer. And oh my God, it was so heavy. It was immensely heavy because all of the wood that was in it. And it had wood sides and a wood top. And it was actually watertight. And it would stand up to the monsoons pretty well. So the first time that I tried to load that thing onto a C-130, guess what? Well, I built it to the specifications that the Air Force gave me, saying, well, it can be this tall. I forget how tall it was. It can be this tall. And when I got there and they rolled it up the ramp to try and put it inside the plane, guess what? The roof of the trailer was hitting that lip in the airplane, and it was not going in. It was not going in. And just that one little place was obstructing it from going in and riding nicely. And I was petrified that I had screwed up and that I was going to go to jail for messing this up, because having those supplies out there in the field was really important to our operations. Well, the load master saved my life. He says, I'll fix you right up here. And so he went to the tires and he let out 90% of the air in those tires. Slid right in like a champ. When we got to Da Nang, where we were having this operations, they took it to the pump, pumped the air right up, and off we went. Off we went. So anyhow, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself with this story. That was the 483rd Tech Supply trailer, I might add. Okay, so when I was still pretty fresh in country, I guess I'd been in country for, maybe 6, maybe 8 weeks, was when I got my first assignment out in the field. And in this particular case, the 281st would go any place that the 5th Special Forces had their operations going, because we supplied the air support for the 5th Special Forces. Wherever the 5th Special Forces went, we were there carrying them around. And you read about the Studies and Observation Group in Vietnam that was run by the CIA and manned and operated by the 5th Special Forces. you will see that we were going into Laos and Cambodia and, well, dare I say, North Vietnam on a fairly regular basis. But in this particular case, we were in our base camp. The helicopters parked in a place called Pleiku. And the thing about Pleiku is that Pleiku is in the Central Highlands in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, and it was like a tabletop plateau that was 7,000 feet in the air. And you know, I had always had this picture of Vietnam as being a tropical paradise. Well, let me tell you, in Pleiku, it was cold as hell. Cold as hell. I guess it was February, maybe March, when we went up there. And the helicopters loved it, because the helicopters love to fly in cold air because it's thicker and the airplane flies better. But I didn't like it because the wind blew all the time. All the time. And the soil in Pleiku was not soil at all. It was dust, like rouge, and very, very, very fine, like talcum powder. And the wind would blow, and the dust would blow, and it would get everywhere. It would get into your pockets. It would get into your food. It would get into your mouth and your teeth. And in my case, what happened was that Pleiku dust was red as, as women's rouge, facial rouge. And it just turned my guitar red. You can still see it in the bindings, where the bindings of the guitar, they're just stained, and where the finish is chipped away, and you can see the white binding. It is really quite a contrast. Okay, so life is going on in the military, and I'm not really fitting in because I'm a pot-smoking hippie in the midst of the 5th Special Forces. What kind of a life is this? Oh, man, it's craziness. But I had plenty of other people crazy all around me, so it was okay. Now, the thing about being in Pleiku is that we were living in tents and sleeping on cots. And not just sleeping on cots, but sleeping on cots that were furnished with Arctic sleeping bags. I mean, Arctic sleeping bags, mummy bags. And when the night came, man, I couldn't wait to get into that bag and go to sleep, because it was the only place where it was warm. And the sad part about it was there was always sand. There was always Pleiku dust inside the sleeping bag. Couldn't keep it out. Well, in Pleiku, when I was first there, was when I discovered something about myself, because I got sucked into a poker game. And when I was a kid and going to day camp and all of that, I learned how to play poker, and I really succeeded at it when I was 12. So it wasn't that big of a deal for me when I was, in Pleiku to win. And that's a little penny ante game with a maximum bet of 25, 50 cents. Well, over the course of about 5 or 6 hours, I won $130 from these guys. And, some of these guys were black soldiers that way outranked me. Like I was still an E2, and they're an E3 and E4 and E5. And I'm going, oh shit, man, it's 2 a.m. I gotta go to sleep. You gotta give us a chance to win our money back. And I said, the hell I do. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll put your money in a pile here in the middle of this bed, and you guys can duke it out and bet on who's going to take the money. Because I don't want the money. I just want to go to sleep. No, you got to give us a chance to win it. And I said, well, fuck you guys. I put the money in my pocket and I went and got in my sleeping bag. And I extinguished my alcohol lamp. And what I learned is that you can be very lucky in cards and gambling, but sometimes it's more of a pain in the butt to deal with your winnings than to avoid playing the game at all. It's like in that movie with Matthew Broderick, Ward Games, where the lesson that the computer teaches us is that sometimes the only way to win the game is not to play. So that was my lesson from Pleiku. And, well, I'm looking, I've got a little over 20 minutes here. I think this is probably a pretty good place to end the story for now. And we'll pick you up tomorrow with episode 4. Or episode 5. Where am I? What planet is this? So long for now. Peace out.